spend a little bit of time telling you a little bit about myself. I was elected in 2019 in Edmonton, and have held that seat for 3 elections now. And I grew up in Edmonton. You know, my dad was a truck driver. My mom was a teacher. My mom stayed home with my 2 brothers and I. And I often talk about the fact that I grew up in a household that wasn't really that political. You know, my family didn't talk about politics the same way that maybe some families did. But they did believe in taking care of our neighbors. They did believe in taking care of our community. They did believe in a Canada that was just, that was fair, and that took care of everyone. And so for me, that's how I came to politics. I mean, first of all, I have 2 brothers. I'm the only girl and I'm the middle child. So if you need someone to be tough, put them in that situation. And I have a real streak in me of wanting to make sure that things are fair. That's what drives me. That's what drives me in this work. And you know, as I look at where we are in the world right now, and the chaos that we are seeing, and the deep threats to our country, to our sovereignty, to human rights, to international law, you know, folks probably heard our Prime Minister give a speech earlier this week. The international rules-based order is broken. The things that we can depend upon as Canadians, things we've been able to depend upon since the end of the Second World War. Those norms, those values, those principles, those laws, those multilateral institutions that we have depended on are no longer meeting the moment. You know, the world is changing, and it is a very scary and dangerous time right now. I think about the war in Ukraine, the genocide happening in Gaza and in Palestine. I think about the horrific loss of life and violence that we're seeing in Sudan, Iran, Venezuela. You know, now the threats to Greenland. You know, we all saw the photo of the Canadian map with a US flag on it. So internationally, the world is changing. Internationally, we have to step up as Canadians. The new future is being built, and we have an obligation to lead with the values of democracy and human rights and protections of our planet and the people that live in this planet. And I think about what's happening in our country. You know, across this country, people can no longer afford to work. That deal where if you got a good job, you could buy a house, you could raise your family with dignity, you could retire with dignity. That's broken. That deal is broken. People can't afford to live in our communities right now. We have a national housing emergency in this country. You know, I have been traveling coast to coast to coast, talking to New Democrats, talking to Canadians, and the cost of housing and the number of people that are unhoused in our communities is a crisis. Do you know the fastest number of people that are going unhoused in our country right now? Seniors who have never been unhoused before. That's the fastest growing population. The second fastest, 14, 15, and 16-year-olds. You know, it shouldn't be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. We have a plan to fix that. You know, I look at their healthcare system and how across the country people can't get primary care. They are waiting for hours and hours in an emergency room just to get care. And the premier of my province, Daniel Smith, has taken the biggest swing at attacking our public health care system since Tommy Douglas and the NDP got health care in place.
Woo!
Thank you. So we've got to fight back on this. You know, we've got to protect our healthcare system. Because if Daniel Smith is allowed to do that in Canada, in Alberta, Scott Moe is just waiting to do it. Doug Ford is waiting to do it. It will spread across this country. And instead of Instead of Mark Carney standing up and saying, you are breaking the law, the Canada Health Act is clear. You know, the Canada Health Act says that healthcare has to be single payer, it has to be accessible to all Canadians. You know, if Mark Carney isn't standing up and defending the laws of our country, if instead he is signing ridiculous MOUs with Danielle Smith, then we've got a problem. You know, that's why we need a strong NDP. That's why we need a progressive party, a progressive movement. Because who's holding the Liberals, and I do say it with air quotes because they have taken a pretty far swing over to the right. Who is holding them accountable? You know, in the last Parliament, we were able to get things for Canadians. You know, we weren't government, but we were able to push the Liberals. We were able to hold them to things. You know, there's a dental care program in this country that 6 million Canadians have accessed because New Democrats used the power we had to get things for Canadians. Is it the same program we would have if it was our choice? No. You know, Don Davies, the interim leader, has said that working with Liberals is like wrestling eels covered in oil. So no, it's not the program we would have had. But 6 million Canadians who didn't have access now have seen a dentist. No, that's important. That's what happens when you have New Democrats in Ottawa. That's why it's important that we rebuild. You know, looking at the world where it is, looking at the chaos that we see, looking at the challenges that Canadians across this country are facing, we need urgently to rebuild our party. You know, we urgently need to have more New Democrats in Ottawa fighting for Canadians, fighting for working class Canadians, you know, legislating, putting into legislation workers' rights, you know, holding the government accountable to the promises that they made. You know, we all know everybody promises a lot during elections. The Liberals love to run as NDP and then govern as Conservatives. And when we're strong, they don't get away with that. So how do we rebuild our party? We do it by organizing. You know, in Edmonton Strathcona in 2008, Linda Duncan won the seat that I now hold. Before that, forever, it had been a Conservative seat. And we organized and we worked and we knocked on those doors and we turned that seat to an orange seat. It is now the safest seat in Canada for the New Democrats. And we didn't want to stop there. You know, we didn't want to say, okay, great, we've got this thing and we're going to hold on to it. Mostly because it's not much fun to be the only New Democrat in Alberta. We decided in 2019 that we were going to build out. So we used some of their riding money and we used it to bring on a regional organizer that would work year round, that would work with all the riding associations, not just the ones where we were going to win, but all of the riding associations. And then we would target seats and we would send extra resources there. You know, in 2021, we sent 350 volunteers from Edmonton Strathcona to Edmonton Griesbach. We sent money, we shared resources, we worked with an organizer, and we doubled the seat count in Alberta to 2. But we used that. You know, it's the idea of having candidates elected early, having our riding associations be strong, giving the resources back to the riding associations so they can engage with their members. You know, trusting our members again, listening to our members, trusting them, letting them have a part in rebuilding our party. You know, if there's one thing I have seen across this country is that people are eager for this. They're excited to rebuild a progressive party. They're excited to rebuild a progressive movement. So we've got to be talking to people again. And that also means we got to work with the provincial parties. You know, the NDP is extraordinarily strong at the provincial level. We are government in British Columbia, you know, government in Manitoba. And I can tell you, when we were government in Alberta, when Rachel Notley was the leader of the NDP, she cut child poverty in half. You know, she actually fought to make real climate impacts, getting Alberta off coal-powered electricity faster than any other jurisdiction. Things happen when New Democrats win. Things happen when we're government. So we've got to work with the provincial parties. We gotta be lifting each other up. We're not gonna agree on everything. But on the 99% of things we agree on, we gotta be working together. You know, the federal party's been an anchor on the provincial parties. That needs to stop. We need to communicate. We need to be talking with our friends within the British Columbia NDP, the Alberta NDP, the Saskatchewan NDP, you know, all across this country. That's a goal for me. And it's a goal for one reason, and I'll end here and then I'll open it up for questions. But I want to win, and I'm unabashedly interested in that. We have a choice to make with this party right now. Do we want to be, you know, the conscience of Parliament? Do we want to be sitting on the sidelines, yelling and screaming into the abyss? Or do we want to elect new Democrats that will fight for Canadians, that will get things done for Canadians, that will hold the government of the day accountable for their actions and their promises that they made to Canadians? I want to win. I'm not interested in yelling into the abyss. I'm not interested in being on the sidelines. Canadians deserve better than that. They deserve more than that. They deserve a progressive party that is a political party that wants to win more seats, that wants to elect more new Democrats, for the simple reason that when new Democrats win, better things happen for Canadians. Thank you. And I think before I actually carry on, would you like to say a few words? Our excellent MLA.